Matthias Sauerbruch is a founding partner of architect Sauerbruch Hutton. The practice is based in Berlin, although Matthias has strong links with London. He and Louisa Hutton studied at the Architectural Association. They completed a rather fine office building in the city of London at New Ludgate a few years ago, and Louisa is a Royal Academician. So Matthias, I was interested to note that in a recent interview with Kjetil Thorsen of Snøhetta, that you comment on a building they've recently completed in Saudi, which is shaped like a series of rocks. And you quoted Peter Smithson saying that architecture is not about form. At one time, your buildings, I think, were recognizable by the use of color, but more recently, you've been playing a bit with form, such as the Experimenter building at Heilbronn. So where do you see your architecture sitting between the Smithsons at one side and Snøhetta on the other?
Well, I mean, this quote was really, I mean, obviously a way to try and provoke Kjetil into a reflection on how architectural form comes about, and how in this particular case they decided to, as a matter of fact, it's a cultural center consisting of a library and a performance space and so on and so forth in Saudi Arabia, and it's made a really ingenious facade. It's incredible, but it's made of very large volumes which look like pebbles. And he explained that the genesis of the design was triggered by an image of a kind of arch, a very primitive arch that they found in Norway, which was literally made up out of sort of pebble-like rocks. I mean, slightly larger than pebbles, and they were talking about the arch at the kind of the tiny keystone that is giving the whole thing its structure, and it's this kind of being a symbolism of the kind of smallest element in society, fulfilling an important role. And of course, I mean, that's all beautiful and quite poetic in a way, but one's sort of wondering, what has it got to do with Saudi Arabia, right? And but of course, this leads to a discussion on architectural form in general, which is partially, I mean, you know, Peter Smithson's statement, I think, is a fallacy. I mean, architecture is obviously all about form. I mean, that's just about the only thing that we can really influence. That's the kind of toolbox that we have. And if we make a form that doesn't look like it's been designed deliberately as a form, but maybe as a result of some kind of idea of use, let's say, I mean, that is also a formal decision in the end, because I mean, all we're doing is kind of arranging material in spatial configurations that seem good to inhabit. But I mean, of course, I mean, one's sort of wondering about the cultural connection. I mean, how much you can translate this sort of, let's say, I mean, in this instance of the Snøhetta project, a sort of idea of archetypal form that is almost sort of just about weight and about gravity, if you like, and sort of the resistance of architecture to that. How much you can translate that into a context like Saudi Arabia, which if anything is maybe traditionally at least influenced by Islamic, I mean, Persian architecture or Turkish, maybe, whatever. And now obviously is a kind of playground, if you like, of the international architectural elite or whatever. Anyway.
But I guess that was also a political statement, wasn't it? Because it was the small pebble was seen as, I would guess, the individual in a undemocratic state.
It was, as a matter of fact, that the lecture series is entitled "On the Power and Duty of Architecture," and he was deliberately, also provocatively, picking this project to talk about that. And he was pointing out that the library is actually a space where, you know, sort of unusual kind of insight for us, is the only space where a female young person could go without accompaniment. I mean, without her brother or sister, cousin, or whatever, who's kind of looking, not sister, brother actually, who's looking after her. Which of course is a very important achievement. And I mean, maybe the sheer fact that this building stands out so much, it's so unusual, is maybe already enough to signify this kind of rather unusual institution and space. So I could follow his argument quite well. But I mean, you were talking about the Experimenta building, ours in Heilbronn, which is Experimenta as a science center. So it's an exhibition space, if you like. The client refers to it as a extra institutional learning space. And it's part of an initiative that is launched by a kind of rather generous patron who has the central seat of his business in Heilbronn, which is north of Stuttgart, to create what he calls a educational campus. He actually started by building university buildings without having the university, and he kind of offered these buildings to state universities, and that idea took on significantly, and now there are approximately, I would guess, something like 20 or so, 25 buildings maybe, that are dedicated to educational use and there are 3 or 4 different universities offering their lectures and courses there. And if you like, the Experimenta building is the sort of beginning. It's meant to be for children from about 6 years, 7 years onwards, and then up to any age. And it's all about getting to know natural sciences, and the whole place is based on interactive stations where you can test things, you can hear sounds, you can find about radiation, about waves, about everything. It's absolutely great. I could spend days there. It's absolutely wonderful, and it's a journey, if you like. I mean, because there are 6 different themes, including there's a kind of also a live theater, what they call a sort of scientific theater, which is literally a theater, but it's also a rotational audience. So it's also a planetarium, sits in a cupola, and you can look into the sky. It's really quite fascinating. But anyway, you go from one subject to the next, to the next, to the next, and we've arranged this in a spiral. So it's like a journey through a building, through kind of natural sciences, if you like. And there's always alternating arrangements of internal spaces, which have all these kind of stations. And then they're relatively extensive, you could call them circulation spaces, but they can also be used as for anything, for like small lectures, demonstrations, for, I don't know what, just meeting, hanging out. We call it the space spiral, the Raumspirale, which gives you a fantastic view across the city. So you have always alternating interior, introvert kind of views, looking almost at the microscopic scale of how things are made up and how how your body works and so on and so forth. And then you come out into this kind of spiral space and you overlook the landscape with all its aspects. It's a rather industrial landscape. As a matter of fact, the Heilbronn before the war was called the Liverpool of Württemberg, which is the southern region there, because along the river Neckar there was an enormous amount of various industry. Today still Audi has big works there and various others. And it's on the Neckar, on that river, that this building sits, and you kind of see from there both agricultural aspects. It's also a great wine region. There are beautiful hills all over, or you can see the city and so on and so forth. So it's very much comes from a choreographic idea. I mean, that you somehow are being fed certain, or you're given the opportunity to see certain views, and you have certain experiences in a certain sequence. that, of course, doesn't only explains the motivation or the starting point of the whole morphogenesis. I mean, as a matter of fact, we don't work so much with digital morphogenesis. We kind of very much working with hand models and sketch models, and kind of, you know, approach the problem from all sides, I mean, as plan sections, and slowly kind of come to an end. And as a matter of fact, in this particular instance, for the first time, we were collaborating with an Institute for Digital Architecture in Karlsruhe, and they helped us to divide the whole. It's a pentacular geometry. To divide the whole geometry into modules. So, for example, the facade, although it kind of looks, you don't really understand, you don't really see it, is made out of repetitive modules, and the number of components has been reduced by a great deal. And that was only through very, very kind of limited geometric shifts. I mean, we had we gave the result of our kind of formal experiments into a computer, and the computer kind of calculated for 3 days and shifted certain points by, you know, minimal dimensions, 5 centimeters here, 10 centimeters there, kind of in space, with the results that the whole thing was much more rational in the end in terms of construction. That was very impressive. I mean, it's the first time we really used computer technology to help in the fabrication and to such degree.
So what are some of the other key projects you've got in the office at the moment?
Oh, it's a wide range, actually. We are, let's say, we've always, as you know, we've always been interested in the question of sustainability, and the beginning, like many other kind of London projects. I mean, basically, we've always been most of the time we've been practicing Berlin, but we came out of London and through the AA and also working experience in London, we somehow brought a little bit of London along, and particularly this kind of discussion of sustainability, double facades, kind of trying to optimize performance and so on and so forth. That was very much at the front of our heads when we came. And that has slowly developed and changed a little bit. And today we're looking much more at sort of life cycle. I mean, you know, it's partially through kind of a disappointing experience, has to be said, because we did the first projects like the GSW Tower and so on, and it worked, and we were all very proud of it. And then we did another project a few years later in Dessau, which is the environmental agency. It's like a government organization in charge of environmental issues, and that was a demonstrative building. We tested all sorts of things like heat exchange, kind of underground heat exchange, and natural ventilation, and you name it, and kind of solar-driven cooling systems, and all of those things, which were kind of very new at the time. And then we had it monitored properly. That's the first time that we had a building properly measured over a longer period of time. And the results were actually, particularly at first, were totally disappointing. And it slowly became better and better and better. And we found that actually it had a lot to do with the occupation. I mean, a lot to do with the people, and how much the people kind of actually accepting this regime that you are kind of putting up, you know, it's like, which is obviously differing from the traditional conventions of, say, heating, ventilation, and all of these things. And even though, you know, we made brochures, we gave lectures, we have posters, it's like explaining it all, and it seemed to be not so complicated. It took a long time for people to get used to it, and sort of slowly, the building was performing the way we were expecting it. And what was a kind of big learning curve for us was when we, for the first time, we were successful in convincing a client to use an existing building and to recycle it. This is a project in Munich in the early 20s. It was a computer building that had been built in the 1980s, and we were supposed to be turning it into an office building, and we ended up taking it apart entirely and just recycling the concrete frame. And when we after we had done it all, and I mean there were no particular frills about any kind of technology or anything. It was just like German standard, German regulations basically. But at the end, we kind of asked our engineers to calculate the saving that was made just through keeping the concrete frame. And that was so significant. It was like the equivalent of 35 years of heating, right? Just not building the concrete frame saved, I mean, virtually saved 35 years of heating. That it became totally clear to us that you can be as clever as you like, and you can use kind of as wonderful kind of electronic controls or amazing kind of computer whatnot regulated systems. You will never save as much energy in one building. So from then on, the kind of material question, the gray energy, kind of became much more important for us. And now we're much more looking at what material. I mean, obviously the technology and the kind of, let's say, the kind of architectural strategies have become sort of part of our routine. I mean, like, you don't just, you don't make a fully glazed building anymore, or you kind of think of solar protection, or you kind of whatever, you kind of expose materials for night cooling and all of these things. It becomes a kind of sort of natural part of our vocabulary. But now we're much more looking at different materials, and obviously timber is the kind of key option in terms of carbon dioxide emission and general carbon footprint. So we have quite a few projects in where timber is the main material, it's the structural material. Smaller projects, but also rather large ones. There's a sort of mixed development in Hamburg, which includes a small tower, which is about 65 meters high. We're also doing quite an interesting cultural project, which is also in timber. It's also about 60 meters tall. It's a drum actually, and it's a diorama. It's a, this kind of it's a kind of circular painting, or tubular, if you like, fabric, which depicts a certain scene, like the 19th century dioramas. So there's a kind of revival that somebody is starting. And various other kind of things in timber. We're doing some housing in timber, and also we're building a office building here just around the corner for the German Parliament, which is entirely made up of modular timber units, which is also chosen because it's a very obviously rapid building method, and we're doing the whole project from very beginning till end in, we hope, 18 months. So almost been going for a year, and the first modules will be placed in about 5 weeks time. So it's all happening really very, very rapidly. It's different way of working, different way of designing, but it's all very interesting. I mean, it feels at the moment as though we're really at a turning point. I mean, and we're sort of trying to explore different routes, different way. So also we have a very large project of reuse as a kind of rather, let's say, not necessarily your favorite building of the 1980s, an enormous office building that was designed for the German post office, and we're converting it. Again, it's only about 35 years old, something like that. And we're converting it, extending it, adding to it, and everything in timber again. And so these are all new experiences for us, and it's quite exploratory in a way, because not many have, also our engineers and so on, have not so much experience with the material and the kind of methods and the kind of legal frameworks and all of these things. So it's very exciting actually. It's really, really quite good. We always have been doing work mostly in Europe, actually not at all in the Far East or Middle East. And that's still the same. Apart from Germany, we're working in Switzerland and in Sweden, which just finished a very nice project. And in France, we're doing a number of projects as well. So yeah, it's despite everything, despite pandemic and so on. I mean, it's a very busy time actually.
And what about London? Your new Ludgate building was very successful. I thought. Yeah, there's nothing in the pipeline from London as a result of that.
No, unfortunately not. I mean, we really liked working in London, and it was also the whole kind of, say, production culture was a bit different, but it was in the end very successful, we thought, and it it's a much more, let's say, kind of cooperative and sort of team led in a way, which we thought was great. And we much like the project and or still like it. We see it every now and then whenever there's somebody in Old Bailey, you kind of see some kind of somebody who won some sort of important trial, and here it is behind behind this person. I see the building, which we obviously like. No, but nothing came out of it. Land Securities, I mean, we're a great partner, but somehow nothing came out of it. And I don't know, Brexit, I mean, obviously is a kind of slightly, from our perspective anyway, a little bit of a downer. Kind of not so, you feel you're being sort of a little bit pushed out, if you like. But at the same time, I'm sure things will normalize, and hopefully one picks up again the kind of normal relations. I mean, not just personal, but also kind of in terms of business.
Well, thank you very much, Matthias. Hopefully it won't be too long before we can come to each other's cities.
Very, very nice to see you, Peter.
So
Thank you very much.
You okay, bye.
Bye.